25th, 2022, and I'm calling to order this meeting of the Police Commission. And for a roll call, we have looks like we have all commissioners present, minus one, either in person or online via Zoom. And moving forward, is there a motion to amend or adopt the agenda?
I'd like to make a motion to amend the agenda to remove Karen Durfee, who is unable to be here tonight.
All right, I second that removal of removing that agenda item from the agenda. Any conversation? Not seeing or hearing any. All in favor of removing agenda item 5.02 from the agenda, please raise your hand or say aye. Aye. And that passes unanimously. Moving on to agenda item 2.01, approving the minutes from the Police Commission meeting on the 27th of September 2022. Hope everyone got a chance to review those. Is there a motion to approve those minutes from September 27th, 2022? Motion by Commissioner Comerford, seconded by Commissioner Sorino. All in favor, raise your hand. Any discussion? Nope. All in favor, raise your hand or please say aye. Aye. That passes unanimously. Next agenda item, approving the minutes from the special Police Commission meeting from October 17th, 2022. Do I have a motion to motion approved? I'll second that. Any discussion? Not seeing or hearing any. All in favor of approving the minutes from the Police Commission special meeting on October 17th, 2022, please raise your hand or say aye. Aye. And that passes unanimously. Moving on to agenda item 3.01, which is public forum. I guess I'll give the floor to people that are present here. If they want to speak, please come sit here at the table. Just state your name for the record, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Wait.
Sure,
is it on now?
make sure the green button should be on the little thing.
Okay.
And then, just speak right into the mic.
Cool.
Thank you.
Hi. Sorry, that was loud. My name's Sam Powers, and I am a student at UVM. And I am here to talk about something very specific, but very important, which is police data practices and the presentation of data, specifically as it relates to Priority 1 incidents and that presentation as an indication of general public safety. So often the police department uses Priority 1 incidents as a proxy for general public safety, and for those who don't know, I assume all of you know are well aware, but Priority 1 incidents are those incidents that the police department has deemed most in need of rapid response. And so they've frequently used these numbers as an indication of general public safety in their annual report, as well as presentations in front of this commission. And what I view as problematic about that is there are actually a variety of different data points within Priority 1 incidents that are not similar. There are Priority 1 incidents that deal with public safety and Priority 1 incidents that don't deal with public safety. So there are, if you look at your sheet, there are homicides, arsons, and resisting arrest, right? Crashes. But Priority 1 incidents are also suicide attempts, overdoses, domestic disturbances. And so when you present...
Recording in progress.
When you present these incidents as aggregated, you tend to skew the actual view of public safety in Burlington. So on the second page of the handout, you can see what makes up Priority 1 incidents, and a significant portion, generally half of all Priority 1 incidents, are not a threat to public safety, whereas a third are, and around 20% are 911 calls, which really have no bearing on public safety or not, because we can't really tell what they were about. So you can see that when there are large jumps in priority 1 incidents that don't have anything to do with public safety, it tends to skew the data to make it look as if Burlington is more dangerous than it is. And so if you'll look at the third graph here, or the third page, we can see kind of a side-by-side of total priority 1 incidents versus priority 1 incidents having to do with public safety. I'm not a statistician, and I want to stress that I don't want to make it look as if I'm trying to make any claims about the meaning of these numbers, but if you'll see the general comparison year to year, there are significant differences in both of these presentations of data. The blue line are the numbers that the police department frequently uses to show general public safety. And from year 2020 to 2021, there's a significant jump in priority 1 incidents, and that makes it seem as though that level of priority 1 incidents is somewhat unprecedented or close to unprecedented. And that's true. But when you look at priority 1 public safety incidents, you actually see that it's relatively normal. And the general downward trend is still significantly strong as it pertains to priority 1 public safety incidents. And the third graph on the last page is just a presentation of the lack of correlation between priority 1 totals and 911 hangups. 911 hangups are included in priority 1 incident counts, and so when you do that, you tend to actually obfuscate important details in the data because they change from year to year pretty randomly. So if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but yeah. Yeah.
Hi, I'm wondering how you got interested in this.
Yeah, I just like to play around with the open data portal, and yeah, I think frequently I hear from my neighbors that Burlington is becoming a more dangerous place to live, and Burlington is becoming a lot scarier. Granted, I live in a generally more conservative building, so it's a lot of people who are kind of maybe more afraid than most, but yeah, I don't think that's true. I think when we present data that suggests otherwise, that Burlington is becoming a more dangerous place to live, I think there are significant ramifications for that in terms of how the public views public safety in Burlington, as well as policymakers, and how they react.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Or?
Could you explain the source of the data and how you accessed it?
Yeah. So yeah, this is from the Burlington Open Data Portal. So it's the same data that the police use. It's just I think frequently they use Valcor as their kind of way to analyze the data. I just used Excel because I'm 20 and don't have access to fancy data stuff. So I basically, yeah, just used Excel and pivot tables to analyze the data. Yeah.
Sam, thanks for doing that and
Yeah.
for looking at the data and taking an interest in it. I want to say back to you what I think you're saying, and then because the public can't see the chart, and the chiefs, I believe, are on as well, and it'd be helpful to share it with them. So my understanding of what you're saying is that priority 1 data includes things that are related to sort of physical safety of the community, public safety, versus incidents that are important but are not necessarily public safety related. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. And so I'm looking at this, and this is actually very helpful. And so here's what I'm seeing on the graph, and that is that in 2012, 32% of all incidents were priority 1 public safety related. So in other words, the types of incidents that you have carved off as being public safety related. They were 32%, they were 36% in 2013 and 2015, and in 2021 they went down to 28%. And in contrast, the non-public safety related, that is suicides, overdoses, so on and so forth, have gone from 44% to 53%. And so that's essentially the point that you're making, is that if we only describe priority one as increasing, we're missing the point that some of those are due to social causes, if you will, versus those that are related to physical threat of community members. Is that accurate?
Absolutely, yeah, I appreciate that synthesis. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
And I think it's also important in terms of not only like public-facing presentation, but also, using that data to make policies and to implement responses to, changes in crime. Like, so if we present data as if it's kind of in one way, right, aggregated, we actually miss the point that a lot of that from 2020 to 2021, the biggest spike, the biggest shift in data was actually due to a lot of, actually I have like numbers here, a 44% increase from 2020 to 2021 in overdoses, and 99 more restraining order services and violations. And that tends to skew the data, but it also, disaggregation is important in terms of responding to that shift in those types of incidents.
So when you say that disaggregation is important in responding, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what comes to mind for me is that the resources that are deployed for non-public safety related, like mental health and overdoses and so forth, is more akin to community service liaisons and community service officers versus armed officers. Was that what you were suggesting?
Yeah,
Okay.
I think, especially when you see that, in terms of the actual percentage or makeup of priority one incidents from 2020 to 2021 was still 28%. So we see, a similar proportion, and that just tells me that yes, I think when you disaggregate, you actually understand better how to direct, I think, department resources. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much. I really appreciate you drawing our attention to this, and I think the idea of disaggregating priority one, if we're going to use it as an indicator of public safety in Burlington, disaggregating it actually is a really good idea. So thank you so much for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Any further questions while we still have him here? Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. And if anybody that is checking on the meeting via Zoom, please raise your hand and you'll be called upon to speak for public forum.
No one by Zoom.
All right, that closes that agenda item. Moving on to the Chief's report. And with that, we welcome Chief John Murad. Chief, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And if, with your permission, I'll share my screen.
Please do.
So this is the Chief's report. I'll try to go through this briefly. I disseminated it to all of you this last week. I disseminated it today to the local media and also posted it on the BPD site. I will acknowledge there are 2 additional slides in this that came from some suggestions that came from department heads. I sent it to department heads and to the city council over the weekend as well. And some of the suggestions I had sort of prompted me to add 2 additional slides, which I'll point out as we go through them. They are in the version that is on that is being presented now. They are on the version, therefore, that will live on YouTube, and they are on the version that is up at the Burlington Police Department website in our collection of all Chiefs reports that we've made over the past almost 2 years now. So this is our sworn officer staffing and headcount. And one of the things that was mentioned was talking about some of the other kinds of staffing. And so I do that in a subsequent slide. As you see, our situation has not materially changed since previous meetings that we've had. This is the priority response plan that was referenced in that public comment / public dialogue with a back and forth, interesting. And I think that there was a discussion there that misses some of the point of this. This is a deployment plan. This is a plan about how we deploy resources based on what we have to go to. And of course, we go to things that are going to have a life safety component. It's true. We don't know what a 911 hangup is, but we know that it can be bad. It is frequently an indication of something that's occurred. Someone makes a call and is interrupted in that call by an assailant. Someone makes a call and passes out. If we ceased to go to those, I'm certain we would have a certain amount of public concern and opprobrium. Similarly, most of these other kinds of incidents are incidents that involve life safety and immediate life safety, and they're not incidents to which we are going to send people who are not equipped and trained to deal with life safety incidents, nor, I think you will learn from the next speaker, will such entities go. These are calls for service for which, frankly, our social workers will not go. Similarly, these are not calls for service to which we would send community service officers. Incident volume is up this year over last year. In fact, it is now past 2020 as well. And this is total incident volume disaggregated, although we do, aggregated, although we do disaggregate it later in the presentation. This is total incidents. You'll see that it just is peaking up above 2020's numbers. It is well above 2021. And if we were to add in traffic volume from previous years, we would actually be up in the range of previous years for total incident volume. These are priority 1 incidents. And obviously the dialogue, the public dialogue there was something that talked a little bit about this and calls into question this. These are clearly labeled as what we know they are. There were more priority 1 incidents in September 2022 than in any previous year. I look forward to seeing some of that disaggregation to see where these changes are. But these are incidents for which we send police officers. And that was the nature of creating the priority response plan in 2021 and then revising it this past May, in May of 2022. Selected Valcor incidents where we do in fact disaggregate, and we can see these progressions. We can see where the numbers have gone vis-a-vis previous years. This is year-to-date data. And these are the categories that do in fact cause neighbors to be concerned. Now, I will note that these are Valcor categories. These aren't necessarily synonymous with offenses or arrests made, but this is what the caller is saying is happening, and that matters. Because if a caller says there's an assault going on, we go to that assault. Even if we find out upon arrival that it wasn't quite an assault, it might have been more properly characterized as a disorderly conduct. It might have been more properly characterized as a larceny over which there was a tug of war, so a larceny from a person. But if it came over as an assault, A, the public has believed that is an assault, at least a member of the public. That creates an effect in our community. And B, we don't know what it is, and we are going to respond based on what we do know, which is the reports to 911. We're never going to send CSOs or community service liaisons, community support liaisons or other social workers to calls of a robbery, for example. This is a picture of how those patterns have changed over the past several years and where we are this year vis-a-vis the 5-year average of those previous numbers. So the numbers come again from these tables. If we add up 2017 through 2021 and divide by 5 and compare to 2022, that's where we get these changes in percentage. There has been some discussion about whether or not we should be including 2020. I welcome anyone who wants to go through that data and crunch it themselves to actually do the math on it and juggle it in ways that they want. But this is what's most effective for us. I believe that it eliminates a lot of the noise about year-to-year comparisons. I believe it eliminates the, misuse of data to compare it to 2012. Frankly, our neighbors don't care how things were in 2012. They care how things were recently and how differently our city feels right now, not whether or not things were better 10 years ago or 15 years ago. This is gunfire, a category that very unfortunately has inarguably changed. And it's one that has set us on a great deal of deliberation, a great deal of effort. And what we see here is a change. I'm thankful, I knock on wood, that we have not seen these in a bit. And I think there has been some incredible work done by our Detective Bureau, done in conjunction with both the Gunfire Task Force that was created, with great partners like the ATF, like the DEA, like South Burlington and other local agencies, and a really terrific level of partnership with the Vermont State Police that we are working on a daily basis beyond those troopers in green and gold that are sometimes seen at the corner of Church and Main. That has allowed us to get some breathing room on these. And I'm hopeful to have some announcements moving forward about additional progress. This is a picture I've added in a pie graph just so people can see where our resources are, patrol versus detectives versus a significant portion that are currently unavailable for patrol for a variety of reasons, including the 3 that we have in the Vermont Police Academy right now. So they are among those 10. This discusses the other capacity that we're building, incredibly useful tools from the community support liaisons. They are a resource I am very, very proud of having built. I'm very, very proud of getting to work with Lacey to create this team and see the kinds of service gaps that it is bridging. It's a really terrific innovation, and as I'll discuss shortly when we talk about the International Association of Chiefs of Police conference, or IACP conference, it's something that isn't really being done in a lot of other places. It's a real leader. Ditto our community service officers, or CSOs. Their ability to respond to those quality of life calls that we have, as you see back in the priority response model, designated for them is something important for us as we struggle with lower sworn officer headcounts than are effective for our city. These are the tiers of response to sort of demonstrate how these resources can and can't work, and the kinds of things that they do and don't respond to. And then this is one of the slides that I added on patrol shifts, and I added it in order to demonstrate where we are with CSOs and how we have increased the number of CSOs. Right now, the talking heads, including mine, are covering over our current patrol shift. But if I move myself over a little bit, others, I think, can control their own screens. You will see there, we have increased the number of CSOs. They have addressed certain gaps, particularly in quality of life response, but they don't make up for the vast diminution of sworn officers that we've experienced. This body, the Police Commission, has been very helpful in attaining new levels of staffing permission. I think that, there was a concerted effort around comparing our city to other cities merely by headcount and population, comparing our city to other cities with large colleges. These were really ineffective ways of looking at the numbers that our city needed. And thankfully, there was the CNA report that I think gave a somewhat better picture of what we need. But when we see how we were staffed in previous years and we see how we're staffed now, you can see that real difference. I threw this in just to talk about range day training. Range day training is a fun day for officers. It's an important day for officers. Obviously, it's a component of our training that we rarely use, but we take very seriously, and we get to do it in a pretty lovely place. I'll admit I make these presentations as much for the public as for the Police Commission, and moreover, I make it for people who may stumble upon them as they are doing due diligence in considering applying to our agency. And this is a slide that I think would attract officers. The idea of being able to get to spend an afternoon twice a year, a day twice a year out in the Jericho range can bring us some officers. We equip very well with these tools. We train very well with these tools. We have some excellent instructors. And although it's a component that we are thankful we very, very rarely use, it's one that we have to know well. This is the IACP, and a discussion of the IACP is what follows. The International Association of Chiefs of Police is a long-lived organization. It's been around for more than a century. Its annual conference this year was held in Dallas, and it was the first conference held in several years since the pandemic. So there had been virtual conferences in 2020 and 2021. It was attended by anywhere from 15 to 18,000 people. There were literally hundreds of vendors, hundreds of educational breakout sessions, a huge and wonderful opportunity to meet not only with officers from other parts of the country, but as you see in the center there, that's Corporal Norris meeting with officers from Brazil, exchanging challenge coins and things and getting to learn about how different things are done in different places. This is a selection of some of the educational sessions. This is just the D rooms. So there were A rooms and B rooms and C rooms and E rooms. This is just the Ds and only a selection of those D rooms. Each of these actually has a backside that shows Monday and Tuesday. You're seeing here Sunday and Saturday. Huge numbers of educational sessions. As I said, more than 250, more than 100 different special interest groups that met. President Biden appeared on video, Attorney General Garland and FBI Director Wray appeared in person. There were breakout sessions of real import to us around recruitment, around working with community, around developing some of the things we've already developed. There were after action reviews of the Las Vegas massacre, of the insurrection at the Capitol. It was a really incredible experience. A picture of some of the various vendors that were available on the floor that we went to. There's some here that we actually use, such as Faro Crime Scene Forensics. We bought some materials from them. The Force Science Institute up in the upper left-hand corner is one that is an important component of how we analyze and look at use of force. This was a really important thing. One of the things that came up at this conference, and I'll discuss the conference a little bit more now, was the work that's been done over the past year around police reform. A key component of that was President Biden's May of 2022 executive order around policing. Now, because it's an executive order and it's from the federal government, it mostly had teeth with federal entities. Excuse me, I'm sorry. But it also it's a way of leading American agencies across the board. The president cannot make the Burlington Police Department or the South Burlington Police Department do anything, but he can make the FBI do something, and that has a ripple effect. Among these were issues around revising use of force standards, basically catching up with where we were already, thanks to this body and work that we did during the 2019 Committee to Review Policing Practices, during June of 2020, when we revised our use of force policy to make it the best in the state. And then since then, the state having adopted that policy as a mandatory policy for the entirety of the state. So we're ahead of the game on that. There were issues around limiting the use of no-knock entries and warrants. We don't do those. And there too, we are far ahead of the game. Limiting the militarization of law enforcement. Again, not something that we do. We do not take military equipment at the Burlington Police Department. We haven't. We are ahead of that game. Leveraging federal grants, some tools for that. We too did that when we went from being authorized at 100 to being authorized at 105. That was thanks to a federal grant that we obtained through the Byrne grants, named after a New York City police officer who was assassinated in his car while guarding a witness's house by a drug lord the witness was going to testify against. I'm sorry. Excuse me. So we're ahead of the game on a lot of those things. And it was actually very interesting to see in these educational breakouts the degree to which Burlington is leading the way. I'm sorry. I think I'll open it for questions now because I lost my voice suddenly. I said I don't think I'll open it for questions because I've lost my voice a bit.
So maybe we can move on to Tammy and then see at 7 o'clock. We can come back to him.
But I can't hear any questions.
So I have a question.
No, so we're going to do something here because we have first of all, to give Chief Murad time to get his voice back, and we have a speaker. So Chief Murad, if it would be okay with you, what we will do is hear from our speaker and then come back to you in about a half hour. I think there are a number of questions about your presentation. Does that sound okay? I'm sorry?
Sorry, Chief, I believe your mic is muted.
My voice is fine. I'm happy to go through with that now and keep ourselves to the 20-minute limit that you gave me, Commissioner.
Let's do this and come back with questions, because I think there's gonna be a lot. You decide. Want to do it? Okay.
Yeah, Chief, we'll give you your questions right now. The floor is open for questions for the Chief.
I have one. Chief, I'm interested in, first of all, it's nice to know that the department is doing so well in terms of its comparison to other places around the country. What are some of the things you learned that you want to move forward on that have not yet moved forward on from the conference?
Great question. We're team back. We're going to team back the folks who went. So it was Deputy Chief Lebrecq, it was myself, it was Sergeant Mike Beliveau, and it was Corporal Jessica Norris. We attended. We each went to different sessions. We tried as much as possible not to go to the same sessions. Even so, obviously, with 250, we didn't touch all of them. We came around with some great ideas. Overtime for community affairs details, trying to work that out in order to re-engage on a community affairs level. We came away with some ideas around how we could work with the community around gun violence. Some of those are somewhat in quote, but I'm hopeful to be able to leverage some. We came away with some ideas around recruitment, brainstorming lists of deliverables that we need to make in order to have a work plan for that recruitment, the degree to which positivism needs to be a component of recruitment, the idea of really understanding why applicants are choosing your agency, responsiveness and communication, all of which I'm hopeful will be facilitated by that recruitment coordinator. That's the purpose of that role, to really maximize responsiveness, communication, and then the recruitment coordinator and the recruiting officer being able to achieve a real personal connection with people so that they feel like they're coming to a place that is a family. We have several officers who've departed us who are actually contemplating coming back. And a component of that is their understanding that this is a different place. This is a place where inside this agency, we do take care of one another. There is a sense of camaraderie. Obviously, there are real morale challenges, but there are other aspects of this place that are good. And figuring out how to best put those forward was certainly a lesson from some of those recruiting breakouts.
Follow up on that, Chief Murad. Can you say a little bit more about the suggestions with regard to working with the community on gun violence? I realize you said your ideas here aren't fully formed yet, but can you share with us anything that you learned on that? I think that's an issue of great interest.
That was actually a class that was attended by Sergeant Beliveau, and there are some concepts around there. Some of them have to do with investigatory avenues. There was a great session called interviewing the gun, something that we are already, again, we're doing. It was actually largely a pitch around NIBUS and working better with ATF partners. We're ahead of that game. Some of the other issues have to do with the ways in which we, develop community relationships. That's a component of that community affairs overtime potential that we're discussing. I went to a very interesting educational session on developing a comprehensive alternative response program for mental illness related calls that basically spelled out what Denver's doing. And we are frankly already doing it absent a co-response capacity, and that is limited by our staffing. Once we have a larger number of officers, co-response is absolutely something I intend to dig into. I went to a really terrific session, a couple on 30 by 30, bringing more women into the profession, a really terrific one called Hearing Her Voice around women's issues in the profession and things that we need to do to make certain that we incorporate attractive measures for female candidates. Also, a terrific course session on historical injustices in policing. There were a lot of things that came out of that one as well. A discussion also on consent decrees at the Perth Town Hall and the ways in which certain municipalities are dealing with those. And a big one from Axon, also around gun violence, having to do with their belief that they can reduce officer-involved gun violence by 50% over the next 10 years. We have to buy a lot of Axon products in order to make that happen, but that's the moonshot that is down at the bottom of the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. The notion of that they have of saying that they can cut all gun-related deaths between police and the public by 50% in 10 years.
Thank you.
Hi, Chief. I'm very glad to hear that you went to the one about historical injustices in policing. I'd love to have an agenda item in the future where you talk about what was discussed at that panel and how we can apply what was learned here. I wanted to go to page 5 on the report, the total incident volume. And I had a question about the information toward the end of the paragraph. If we were to add 2017's traffic volume and foot patrols to 2022's overall incident volume, 2022 would have more incidents than any year since 2017. I had a concern about that because 2017's incidents are with 2017, and I don't believe we should infer adding incidents that occurred then to not even account for 2022. They just didn't occur in 2022.
So the point of that is that those are largely discretionary activities. They are officer activities that are officer proactivity. So officers largely make traffic stops when they observe a traffic condition, but they also do it when they are out and encouraged to do traffic. We have stopped encouraging officers to do traffic. Foot patrols are actually up this year thanks to the CSOs, but they were down a lot over the previous years owing to a combination of factors, including a desire to sort of minimize foot patrol and also fewer officers available to do them. What this is saying, and I accounted, by the way, for the difference between foot patrols. I didn't double count the foot patrols that happened or the traffic stops that happened. So I took the difference between 2017 and 2022. What this is saying is that if officers were as proactive, creating incidents that are based on their discretion in this year as they have been in past years, we would be at the same incident volume. I've said this a couple of times. I've said it before that a good percentage of the decrease in incident volume is not because the public is calling us less. It is because officers have been told explicitly to do less. They've been told about it with regard to traffic stops in order to address some concerns we had about traffic stops. We see that on this slide when we look at the plummet of traffic stops there to have gone from somewhere in the order of almost 3,000 to barely 300. That's the difference. You add those differences back and suddenly 2020 looks a lot like 2017. And what that tells us is the public isn't calling us less. It tells us that officers are doing less proactive enforcement.
Yes,
because
sir.
they're told to by the public and by the police administration.
Okay, so I understand what you're saying, and due to the fact we're limited for time, I just have to disagree. There are a number of reasons that led into the reduction of traffic stops. And we really can't examine them right now, but they're not occurring. And I am concerned about adding, saying that implying that this same number would be occurring, when in fact it hasn't. So that is a concern of mine in terms of making sure that when people review this report, because I personally have been out giving presentations and using your reports, I need to feel confident about the data and that there's no intention to mislead anyone. And that's the concern that I had. The other question I had
I'm sorry,
was
Commissioner. There is no intention to mislead anyone.
and I'm just trying to bring to your I hear what you're saying, sir. I just need you to hear my concern and just take that into consideration. That's all I'm asking. I'm not asking for a debate back and forth. I'm just asking you to hear my concern. Those incidents didn't in fact happen in 2022, and there's a lot of reasons around why traffic stops, are not occurring, and we can add that as a future agenda item. The other question that I had, sir, was just kind of been asked questions from the community about how it's going with recruiting lateral transfers. Had we had any applications from potential lateral transfers?
No, we have not had any applications from lateral transfers. We had expected some. We had been told that there were some in the county that were interested in it. But right or wrong, fair or not, there's a perception among the officers that we still have, among officers that we've lost, and among many of the officers that we've unsuccessfully sought to hire in this area, that the atmosphere in the city has not changed substantively enough for the salary that we're now offering to overcome those concerns.
Understood. Would love to have another future agenda item about positive public engagement on behalf of the department. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments for the chief?
Just maybe one follow-up on the recruitment. We understood at the last meeting you were on a recruitment trip, and thank you very much for doing that. I'm just wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on some of the challenges and opportunities you're facing in recruiting, and also the status for the recruitment coordinator and the recruitment officer, how that search is going. Thank you.
Sure, thank you very much for that, Commissioner. The trip that I was on was to New York City. I stopped in at both Mercy College in Dobbs Ferry and at John Jay College in Manhattan, and distributed flyers that we made. Shannon Trammell made a really terrific brochure for our recruiting efforts that we were able to use. I spoke at a class. I discussed criminal justice class, talked to professors there. Was going to also attend another meeting down there at the end of this month, but really can't make the 4-hour drive, 4+ hour drive back and forth for the sake of a 2-hour conference. Although it is valuable, it is a significant, there's a significant Latino population at the school, and a lot of those folks are card-holding residents. They're permanent residents, but not citizens. And we are one of the few agencies that will hire non-citizens. Appropriate background checks, of course, are necessary. And so I was hopeful that that community might be a uniquely amenable one for us, or rather we might be something that was attractive to them. The recruitment coordinator position was only recently posted. I'm not certain. I have not yet seen a single application for it, although I know there have been some. And the recruitment officer, to make clear, is a sworn officer who is in the police department. She's been a member of the police department for 18, 19 years. And so she is hard at work taking over for the former recruitment officer, who was Megan O'Leary. The current officer, Carolyn Irwin, was a recruitment officer, I think, 3 recruitment officers ago. She brought in a lot of terrific current employees, and I'm hopeful that she's going to be able to do that again. Corporal Norris, who was in the ISCP with us, went to a number of different things on recruitment. She and I are going to be meeting with Carolyn and talking about a lot of those things that we learned in order to try to leverage that. The next step for us is really to take the money that was granted to us in the budget by the mayor's hard work and the city council, and be able to apply that towards finding a recruiting firm, a marketing firm, to help us target outside entities. I think that we have a strong chance of being able to attract folks from other localities to our city, people who are in Pennsylvania, in Colorado, in other parts of the country. I don't think that we've got a very strong one of attracting folks here. I thought that the contract would be something to overcome it, but they have real concerns about what they believe to be the political atmosphere, about some of the things that they have concerns around from this body. and about issues that they have fears about with regard to serving in Burlington. There's also a matter of volume. We recently lost our most recent graduate of the police academy, who resigned owing to the fact that there was too much work here. That was a component of staffing. That was a component of the volume and variety of the work that we see. And this is a person who in likelihood is going to go apply at the University of Police, Vermont Police Department, where the pace is just different.
Thank you.
A quick question about the new base annual salary, which is $71,000, is that correct?
Yes.
So a concern that I've had, and I've brought this up with the mayor several weeks ago, regarding that salary had not been changed. So when you go to the site where potential officers would have to apply, the new salary range wasn't showing. The recruitment bonuses were, but not the new salary range. It had not been corrected. It was wrong in 2 potential landing pages. I also spoke to Counselor Paul last week, and I advised her that this was still an issue. She sent out an email, and now I see it's been updated to $70,000, but still not $71,000. So I wonder if that is something that you can look into with the HR department, I assume. I don't know who would be responsible to getting updated information to the site where people actually have to submit their applications. But I think it's important that in all landing pages where someone who is interested in working for Burlington, wherever they potentially land, that we have these changes that we've put in place to be more competitive. Thank you.
A couple of comments, actually, and perhaps there might be something that Chief Murad wants to respond to. So I want to just talk a moment about the data. I appreciate it as a discussion because it's one of the ways that the community understands what is public safety in Burlington. And I appreciate the distinction, Chief Murad, that what you're looking for with these priority 1 incidents is deployment versus what Sam Powers, who brought this material to us, was looking at in terms of an accurate representation of the dangerousness, if you will, of Burlington. So the same data can be used for different purposes. And both of those, I think, are valid and important. So once again, I appreciate the notion of disaggregating the data because the most frequent comment that we get from the community is around how safe is Burlington. And so we have an interest in ensuring that that's accurately, or that we can represent that well in the data. I want to just say something about the data with regard to the comparison to 2017 through 2021. I mean, what we have observed is that there has been an impact of COVID. I think, at least I'm going to suggest that, and I'm going to ask you about that, Chief Murad, but let me just state my thoughts here. And that is that we are seeing this all over the country. That is increased gunshots, increased mental health problems, a rise in overdoses again, and so forth. And so that's one of the challenges in representing these data, that typically when we look at data over time, when we look at a trend, we want to remove those years that are aberrations. And 2020 and 21 are aberrational years, hence the usefulness of disaggregating in that way. But I want to ask you, Chief Murad, since you were at the IACP conference, was there any discussion about this national trend with regard to violence and mental health problems that are associated with COVID? And what, if anything, have you learned from that you might share with us?
Well, it certainly came up, but I think that, when we look at, for example, calls for service, or priority 1 incidents, we don't see drastic changes in the, at the time of the pandemic. In other words, it didn't nosedive in April or March when the pandemic began. It certainly was depressed. We see that definitely with 2021. But 2021 wasn't even the first year of the pandemic, nor was it the worst of the closures with regard to businesses, et cetera. So there are, I think a mixed bag insofar as how we draw correlations between what was happening or not. I've seen other kinds of charts that are very, very clear. The chart of gunfire in New York City spikes entirely during the early days of the pandemic protests and then really takes off after the George Floyd protests. And I think that there was a consensus in agencies at this conference around the degree to which there has been a sense of police withdrawal, definitely contributing to what we are seeing insofar as crime goes. I think that we definitely know that that this increase that we see in this table of mental health issues is something that where we are with regard to general zeitgeist, whether it's the pandemic, whether it is the political milieu, whether it is issues around social reckonings. Certainly those things affect what we see here with mental health. They certainly affect what we see with overdose, although that is also changed by the kinds of drugs that are at play. We've moved from opioids, oftentimes over-the-counter opioids, to heroin and now to fentanyl and other drugs. They are easier to overdose on. They are more difficult to regulate with regard to a user's ability to understand how much the user can or can't take at a given moment. We've seen a lot of these things and they have a lot of different potential causes. And while I do think that these are ultimately going to be years that are going to occupy statisticians for quite some time, I don't believe that removing them from our math is valid when people understand their environment based on what they most recently remember and how they remember something to be. And that memory can sometimes go all the way back to, say, childhood insofar as nostalgia goes. But when they really think about it felt safer or it seemed to be safer, they're not talking about years and years ago. They're talking about a sort of a living memory. And I think that living memory is about 5 years.
I guess we can all debate what living memory is, depending on one's age. So, but in any case, let me, I have one more question, but I want to just have a comment. And that is in response to your comment that recruitment is difficult and partly owing to this body. And I assume by that you mean the Police Commission. And I want to just say that civilian oversight is a bumpy road, and we have been given a mandate by the City Council to provide oversight. And we have recommended that the Police Department do a training with NACOL, the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, so that officers can better understand civilian oversight and also understand its benefits to the police department. This isn't just an effort to somehow criticize the department. We are looking for procedural justice here, that policies and protocols are followed, that the community values with regard to policing are carried out. And hence our suggestion that the department have that training so that officers can better understand our role. But I do want to just acknowledge that this is relatively new, and other agents, other law enforcement, civilian oversight bodies in the country have all had difficult beginnings, and I'm hopeful that we nevertheless can establish a cooperative relationship. And certainly I would be happy, and I'm sure any of my commissioners would be happy, to talk to officers about the work that we do. I think that if there are concerns, it would be important to air those and have a discussion about those and see if we can get to a place that there's a better relationship, because it's in the service of all of the citizens of Burlington that we're doing this. And I know the police department is as well. And so to the extent that we can work out any issues, I think that would be very healthy. So I look forward to an opportunity to do that with you, Chief Murad. The question I wanted to ask you is something that came to us from the City Council, and that is the contract with the state police. Can you tell us about that? And I am particularly interested if there are use of force incidents that involve the state police. What is their reporting? If there are complaints, for example, while they're on duty here, will they come to the commission as well? So in other words, how will we know what is happening there, especially as concerns certain types of incidents that might cause concern? Thanks so much.
So Deputy Chief Lebrecq attended a number of sessions at IACP around oversight, and I'm sure he'd be happy to speak to them. Insofar as the Vermont State Police, the arrangement with them, the contract with them, and this goes to any time police come into our city, is that they occupy their own chain of command and they answer to their own internal mechanisms. And frankly, the desire to have that kind of control is perceived in entities like the Vermont State Police, like other agencies in the county who had officers thinking of coming here, as a degree of overreach that makes people uncomfortable with coming here. When patrol officers come to work, for example, the marathon, they are not under Burlington's jurisdiction. They're operating in Burlington. They're working and being paid by in that case, Run Vermont. But should something happen, they're going to answer to their respective chains of command. The same is true of our federal partners. Several years ago, there was an officer-involved shooting involving federal officers. That is not the purview of the Burlington Police Department, or for that matter, Burlington entities. There are federal controls on that. And I think that that is a component of any contract in which we enter, into. And no entity would give away that sovereignty in order to come into the city.
Really helpful. I appreciate it. Thanks.
I'm not seeing any further questions or comments for the chief. So, Chief Merritt, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Awesome. Moving on to agenda item 5.01. And I'll give the floor to Commissioner Comerford.
So we're fortunate tonight to have Tammy Boudreau, who is a native Burlingtonian, who has received a bachelor's degree at UVM. Tammy then moved to Boston for 3 years while she earned her JD at Suffolk University Law School. She returned to Vermont, residing in Burlington until 2007. Tammy's been a member of the Howard Center Street Outreach Team until 2003 and became the team lead in 2017. Tonight, Tammy's going to talk with us about de-escalation, what it is, how it works, and its limits. So welcome, Tammy. Thank you so much for being here.
Is that it? There we go. Okay, thank you for having me. Just one quick correction. My name was misspelled on the agenda.
Apologies.
Everybody misspells it. It's B-O-U-D-A-H, just for
Oh, my goodness.
correction's sake.
Can you say your last name out loud for everyone?
Buddha,
Gotcha. Thank you.
B-O-U-D-A-H. And yes, I'm the team lead for the Howard Center Street Outreach Team. I'm looking around and I'm thinking most of you are familiar with what the team does, but I'll just tell you briefly. We are currently a team of 5 outreach workers. Our default position when we're not busy, which isn't often, is trying to do proactive engagement with individuals who would be in the downtown area. Generally folks who are homeless, maybe on a fixed income, using substances in the area to purchase or just congregate with others, common spaces that people who don't have a lot of means might use. We're downtown trying to create relationships with people so that if there is a crisis or a need for a de-escalation, we have that rapport in place. But also to be sort of a roving information sign, have the ability to check in on people, make sure that people are doing well. If people start to decompensate or slip, to hopefully be able to be there to offer them services, to try to catch things before it becomes a crisis. When we're not doing that, we take calls for service from clients themselves, from merchants, from family members, from concerned citizens, and from dispatch. And typically, our calls from dispatch are when a call comes in for a mental health issue that does not seem to be escalated to a point where an officer is warranted, and they'll ask us to go and either take care of the incident ourselves or call for an officer should we need one. And that's a change. Up until 2021, it had always been a co-response. So dispatch would call us and say, hey, so-and-so is going out to so-and-so's house. can you come with us? Or we're already there. In the last year or so, where you see that 38% increase, a lot of that is us having to go out just on our own. So that's a brief introduction to us and how we fit into this. So de-escalation, what is de-escalation? Our definition of it would be the use of communication or other techniques during an encounter to stabilize, slow, or reduce the intensity of a potentially violent situation without using physical force. So we go up to the point where words are no longer sufficient. That's where our purview ends. The crux of de-escalation is that the person who is needing to be de-escalated is in a state of hyperarousal. What I mean by that is they are in that sort of flight or fight mode. The amygdala region of the brain is lit up. The person can no longer access rational thought and is pretty much out of control. Can't control their reactions, can't control themselves. And our goal is to help the person recover their calm and return to that calm, regulated state. And a de-escalation, it can happen, if you think of it more as like a continuum. So you start off, person sitting over here, they're calm, there's a trigger, they become agitated, it starts to accelerate, it peaks, and then there's the recovery. The de-escalation can happen anywhere along there, and obviously you use different tools, your response is going to be different, your choice as to whether or not you will respond becomes different depending on where you're at in that continuum. Before you do de-escalation work, you really need to kind of do some self-checking. My team and I kind of check in with ourselves every day, and throughout the day, we will often like use each other as sounding boards, like, hey, do I seem et cetera to you, or blah, blah to you? Because you want to be aware of how you are feeling, where your mood is at. Are you hungry? Are you tired? Are you cold? Are things triggering you? Is today a day that you're not fit for human interaction? These are all things you have to ask yourself, or you won't, because your goal is that you're going to be the person who's going to create this core of calm, right? You're going to be the person that the person who is dysregulated can join up with, that's a horse parlance, but it means they sort of mirror your personality or what you're doing and kind of take on your energy. So you start off with you're here and they're here, and you're trying to move over here so you're more of in like a partnership position with them as opposed to over here adversarially, and also like helping them come down with you. So that's that would be the physical or the visual of what we're trying to do. So you need to check in with yourself. You need to first of all, make sure that you're okay to do that. When you arrive on scene, you want to be aware of space. You want to create your own space so that you're safe. You want to make sure that the other person has their space so that they perceive their safety. They may have a huge trauma response. They may have something horrible may have just happened to them. You being too close, although we have a tendency to touch people when we want to comfort them, fight that and keep space, because that allows people to just sort of decrease their anxiety around what's going on. Listen to what the person's experiencing. Certainly, you've come there with your own agenda, but the first thing is to remember that that person, whatever it is they are feeling, is real. Those are the sort of the facts for what's going on. Whether you think those feelings are real, justified, or even if they may be based on delusional content, what that person is going through is what's important at the moment, and that's what you need to address. Make sure to align your verbal and your nonverbal communication. Like right now, I'm trying really hard to make sure that my voice is even and I'm not gesturing too much because I'm trying to, project authority and confidence. And so I want to be doing that by making sure that everything is in alignment. Same if you're working with someone who's escalated. If you are fearful, you don't want to project that onto them, because then they won't see you as a person that they can latch onto. So make sure that your verbal and your nonverbal are gonna match up. Be mindful of your gestures, your facial expressions, your tone of voice. You don't want to accidentally come off as condescending or judgmental. All of those things are things to take into consideration. Lastly, allow the person time to process, time to digest, time to decide. Again, you get to the scene, you're on your own timetable. It could seem what is 2 minutes, might seem like a half an hour to you, but you have to kind of step out of yourself and let that person have, to the extent that it's safe, let that person have the time that they need. In that aroused state, information might not be coming through very quickly, so they really may need to hear everything 5 times. It may take them 5 times as long to understand. You need to respect that. So then I'm going to talk about kind of 4 basic methods. Verbal, which is, it's interesting, it's verbal, but it's mostly comprised of active listening. Redirection, grounding exercises, and change of venue. And as I say that, I just want to caution that there is really no one perfect tool. I think of it as like a skilled carpenter. You kind of pick up, you go to different things and you go, gee, I wish I had a specific tool for that next time. And so you pick up that tool, or, you know, this screwdriver always seems to do the trick for me. So you might gravitate towards that one first. I think the same thing is true with de-escalation skills and techniques and using them in the field. So in terms of verbal active listening, the first and most common would be emotional labeling. It's often very helpful when you first are trying to create a rapport with a person, which is really the foundation of being able to dysregulate a person. No, help them regulate. Get out of a state of dysregulation. Is to be able to create a rapport with them so that they can feel comfortable, they can let down, they can get out of that emotional state, they can work with you. Emotional labeling can be a really good first step with that. So you start the conversation, say, you seem really angry, or you seem very afraid. Sometimes the person is so dysregulated, they are not even aware of what they are projecting. They're just very into their own head. They don't know how they seem. They don't really understand what it is they're doing. So being able to start on that and to kind of get a check to see, is that actually how they're feeling? And to give them a chance to label it, to have them thinking about how they're feeling intellectually. Is this anger? Is that what I'm feeling? That can be a really good way to start the process. Paraphrasing, summarizing what they tell you by reflecting it back. That way, you make sure there's no misunderstandings. Again, it helps them to have that intellectualization, which allows them to sort of get out of their amygdala and back into their higher functioning. Effective pauses can be very, very effective, obviously, because they're effective pauses. But oftentimes people, they're not really ready to speak. Our society has taught people to abhor a verbal vacuum. So if you sit with someone, oftentimes you can draw them into conversation just by being quiet instead of asking them a gazillion questions. So that's often very effective. It also, again, gives them time to start thinking again and to start using their words and to start getting more on an intellectual level. While you're doing that, minimal encouragers. Yeah, really? When? What? It lets the person know that you're interested. It encourages the flow of the conversation, but it doesn't interrupt it. So it kind of just keeps the person going. Open-ended questions, I think, are probably the most important. When you walk into a room, you might walk into a room and the room is trashed. And your concern as a person, like my concern might be, why did you do this? Because you want to know, I might want to know, are they suffering from a delusion? Do they intend to hurt themselves? Are they going to hurt somebody else? So my question might be, why did you do this? But in order to get that answer, what I really need to ask is, how did this happen? If I say, why did you do this? That's very accusatory. It might put them into a state of feeling like they have to deny it. They might not perceive that they did it. If I ask them, how did this happen? It gives them the floor and then they are able to give me the series of events, which is what's important. I need to know, in addition to what happened, I need to know what they perceived happened. And again, it helps to build that rapport because now I'm an ally. They're telling me their story and I'm listening. Using I messages. If you do have to deliver any bad news, make it about yourself. You know, I know you're very anxious, and I'm sure that the pacing is helping. I'm having a really hard time concentrating when you do that. Or I don't feel safe when you jump up and scream like that. I know you don't mean anything by it, but could we please just try sitting down? So make it about yourself. You're eliciting a cooperation response, which people often want to, hopefully by this point, you've created some kind of rapport, now they want to do something for you. So you can kind of get them, again, to align with you, start to kind of model how you're doing things. That tends to be very helpful. So that's the verbal active listening piece. If none of those work, or in addition to those, we also try redirection. Sometimes it's helpful to engage the person in a thinking activity, right? Like if the person's running back and forth and they can't really seem to stop, say, hey, you know, I know you're really good at cars. I have this blinking light, it's red, it keeps coming up on my dashboard, it's kind of to the left. Can you explain that to me? And that can get them to start thinking about something, it gets their interest, it redirects them from whatever it is that has them pacing, and now they're thinking in a different space. Ask them, you know, children's birthdays, how to explain a hobby or a skill, things like that. Ignore challenging questions. Sometimes people will, when you're trying to talk to them, they will want to question your authority, they'll, you know, kind of be like, you're not the boss of me. And all of those things, those aren't really the issue. And you can redirect the conversation by just kind of trying to bring it back to the issue at hand. So you ignore the challenge that the person is kind of giving you verbally, but not the person. Just bring the focus back to how, like, yeah, I understand that's how you feel, and how can we work together so that we can have this work out to your benefit. Setting limits. As a person progresses through the crisis, give them respectful, simple, reasonable limits. Offer concise and respectful choices, and possibly depending on where you're at in the situation, crisis consequences. I think sometimes it's fair to let people know, you know, we want it to work out this way. If we can't get it to work out this way, we might have to move to X. And I don't want it to move to X, and I don't mean that as a threat. I'm just really trying to recognize your autonomy and give you good information here. Be clear, speak simply, and offer positive choices first if it's possible. You might end up redirecting yourself. You might have come in with one goal in mind, and it's the best possible outcome, but you realize you're not going to be able to get that. So you might have to be thoughtful, decide about what rules are negotiable and what are not, and if you can offer the person some options and flexibility, you might be able to have a different yet still positive outcome, and avoid unnecessary altercations and fight the other battle a different day, if need be. Another technique are just simple grounding exercises, which I think are very common, especially if the escalation is anxiety-based, which is pretty prevalent. You know, like breathing techniques, box breathing, naming items, like name 5 things you can touch, 4 things you can smell, 3 things you could taste, and 1 thing you could hear. Again, that's the whole idea of grounding the person back into their body, thinking, not being so visceral and feeling things. Focusing on feeling a certain part of your body, like focus on feeling your hands, focus on feeling your feet, counting backwards, drinking water, things to like literally bring the person back into their body. If they're, de-escalated enough to get to that point. And like I said, you can use all of these along the continuum, so you might start using just the verbal things in the beginning, and then as you get to the end, you work your way down to the grounding exercises. The last one that we use pretty regularly for street outreach is changing the venue. Sometimes really what's going on is the environment or the people in the environment are just kind of causing the dysregulation or just really overstimulating the individual. So a lot of times it'll be like, hey, come over here and talk to me about it. You know, let's go for a walk over there. Let's go get a coffee. And just the walking, the moving, the talking, getting the person out of that space, out of their emotions, literally changing the scenery can often do a lot for this situation. So that's kind of de-escalation in a very small nutshell. I have an hour-and-a-half long training that I do on it, so that's pretty condensed. But I think, you know, one point is, at what point is de-escalation no longer practical or safe? The answer to that is when it becomes a situation that requires a behavioral intervention or containment. Safety concerns that would come to mind that we would look at that would tell us that we've reached that point, that talking, bargaining, all of these things, these aren't going to work, would be aggressive behavior in an unsecured setting where we're not able to have at least a two-person co-response. Report of currently violent behavior. A person having a recent history of violence within the last week or so, of a significant violent act in an unsecured setting, or even in a secured setting. Significant impairment due to substance use, and I would argue that the type of substance would also come into play. We have found recently that people who are dysregulated due to methamphetamine use are particularly prone to violence, not able to regulate, report to us later that they really did not have any appreciation for what they were doing at the time, and that they felt like they had no way to really control themselves. So we take that to heart. Threats of harm to self or others with a weapon. So those are all times that we would say that's not something that we can do, particularly if it's a person that we don't have a relationship with. To Chief Murad's points earlier, the 38% spike in mental health calls, that used to be a paired response. So in addition to having an increase in the type of calls that we go to, we do not have an officer with them. And people are increasingly escalated, as what you were talking about earlier. Like, people in general are increasingly escalated. There's a sense of desperation. There tends to be multiple polysubstance use on board. The methamphetamines are particularly alarming. Oftentimes there is a pointed weapon. We fortunately haven't had any problems with responding to someone with guns ourselves. Our compatriots, the community outreach team who do the surrounding towns, they are often met at the door with somebody with a gun. So they're looking for bulletproof vests. We have had many people threaten to stab us, so we are interested in the stab-proof vests. But these are things that these are new. This is, Commissioner Comerford had asked what changes had we seen in the last 3 years, and this is certainly something that never occurred in the last 3 years, ever. I'd say in the last year to year and a half, even within the last year, it has really just fallen off a cliff.
So Tammy, what meaning do you make of that?
What do I what?
What meaning do you make of it?
Meaning, do I make of what?
The increase
The
in
increase?
all of these behaviors.
I think there are many reasons for it. I used to kind of poo-poo when people said, oh, it's the pandemic, but I did just read a very interesting article in the New York Times that elaborated on that and how, it's sort of really chipped away eroded at people's personalities, like their extroversion, abilities to deal with people in an intersocial capacity, tolerance for fear or anxiety, just heightened paranoia. So I do think that the pandemic has had a part to do with it. Certainly the rise in methamphetamine in the Burlington area has had to do with it. We have been hearing since last summer from many of our clients and people who frequent public areas. So, I mean, people who get disability benefits, live in subsidized housing. So people who have like very fixed incomes and not really any access to disposable income, so really rely on public spaces to recreate, to get out of the house, to not isolate, have been telling us that they feel increasingly less safe. And I heard that from clients last summer, but I didn't feel that way myself. But to take that as sort of the canary in the coal mine, right? Because they have less resource, less power, less protection than me. And now I'm like, yeah, I'm with you. They attribute a lot of that to the same thing, people being paranoid, but lack of police presence is something that I always hear from clients, that they just feel like, and that is, it's not just having police be there, but it's the fact that police aren't there, that there aren't necessarily consequences to a lot of things, that the likelihood of being prosecuted for things seems to have diminished. I know some of that was due to the lack of judicial process during the pandemic. But also just sort of there's just a general sense of lawlessness. Like anything is possible, everyone can do anything. No one's here watching. It's all okay. You're not going to get caught. If you do get caught, you'll be let go. You'll just get to do it again. And a sense that amongst the people who do the things, that they don't really have any other options. That, I have to steal that. I have to do this. That they, and to some extent, I would argue that there are not as many options. I mean, it is difficult to have someone hospitalized for mental health issues right now. When people are brought to the hospital involuntarily, they are often released within a couple of hours. Not really any better than they were when we got them up there, but they are regulated now. They're calm for now. Only to do it again the next day. There's not a venue for people who are seeking long-term substance use treatment. I mean, there's nothing for people to strive for. There's not really housing to be had. Maybe there will be some at some point. But right now, there's not housing to be had. There's not housing, we have the ESD program, but right now it's almost impossible to access a voucher inside Chittenden County. So that makes it off the table for many people. And there's not a consequence to not do it. So there's really nothing, there's no reason for these folks who are just suspended in this kind of state of misery to feel any reason to move any one way or another. And I would imagine that if I were in that state, I would not really be thinking that far ahead. I would really be just getting from day to day to day to day. And in that day, it's more desperation, more paranoia, decreased physical health, all of the above.
Tammy, how large is the population that you're talking about here in the Burlington area?
I really don't know. I mean, I sat at a meeting yesterday or not yesterday, but last week, where we kind of did a rough count of how many people might be like living in tents around the Burlington area, and we came up with about 80. Some of those are the same folks who are using substances but not really able to progress in any one way or another. But there's probably another 40 or so people you could add to that. And then there are people who are here who are new to the area, either from out of state, out of town, or have been in Burlington but just kind of have surfaced, who are here, I would say, for the purposes of, well, I would say, I know, some of them are here for the purposes of preying upon people who are homeless, using substances, but get benefits, so they have some money, they have some means. So there's a group of people who are kind of preying on them. And add them to the mix. Because that's the other thing, I think, talking about being able to use like City Hall Park, for example, a client saying that, he didn't feel safe going there anymore. And I mean, I've had, now that I think about it, probably 15 to 20 clients that used to go there as a place that they wouldn't be isolating, so they wouldn't start drinking again, or they wouldn't start using again, or just to have human connection. They've disappeared over the course of the year. And, their comment was always, well, what's gonna, those people over there, what's gonna happen to them? I used to get into trouble. Nothing happens to them. That's not fair. But also saying that they didn't feel safe around some of those people. But as the folks that used to talk to me about feeling unsafe have disappeared, like, we have less allies. So we used to be able to walk into the park and have that sort of social currency where there were people that we had allies that we could, like, they would be a friend of a friend, and then we could build rapport. And so that's really made it, a more challenging environment for us to do our work, and to support the people who are there. Because we don't really, it's kind of a catch-22. We spend a lot of time being out on call with the police, for the police, to the mental health calls, which means we don't necessarily have as much time to stay and build the rapport, and we lose social currency over time to people who are there to victimize our clients. It's kind of a bad revolving door. It's a rambling answer to your question. I don't know if that's helpful.
I actually don't think it was rambling. I think it was actually very informative.
Okay, good.
Because it's also, you brought together the connections between.
Okay,
So nice work, thank you.
thank you.
Tammy, thanks so much, and our apologies for misspelling your name. It's an awesome last
Everybody
name.
does. Everybody does. It's okay.
I had a question for you. So I really appreciated your explanation of de-escalation. It sounds like we all need that kind of training. But I'm curious, have you ever, does the police department ever ask you to watch body cam video with them to perhaps observe officer behavior with regard to de-escalation and get advice or input from you? Or is that something that you think might be useful?
No, they haven't done that. We do, so a few years ago, I can't remember, and maybe Chief Murad could help me. We have participated with the department in their trainings where we do the role-playing piece of being the person that they're gonna de-escalate. And we give feedback as we're doing that. In terms of us kind of giving them feedback on Axon cameras, to be honest, they receive much more intense and many more hours of de-escalation training than we get. We really only do the training up to the point where words aren't gonna cut it anymore, and then we're out. They have to learn everything of words to soft restraint, to hard restraint, to anything beyond that. So, I mean, if they wanted us to help them with that, I mean, we would be happy to offer our opinion. I'm not sure that we are the correct entity for that. I'm not trying to be like falsely humble. I think that they are more advanced than we are in that kind of training.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. Those were really great reminders, and it's extremely interesting hearing how the team, I see the team a lot. I live very close to downtown. I walk in that area constantly. I make myself go through the park, with the police commissioner's eye, what's going on today, or how are things going, and I see the team interacting. I was particularly moved by fighting the tendency to want to touch people. And I would love it if at some point you could provide us and the chief with some documentation, something that's good to read about that, because I frequently get concerned with certain use of force issues that are started because someone's touched. They are not, at that point, a threat. They are not posing a physical threat. And they get touched, and that sets them off. And in these particular incidents, I feel that certain things could have been avoided. So I would just be curious if you have any recommended reading on that, because I feel that that would really help the department in some way. These are incidents that really disturb me greatly, and I don't know, part of it's being trauma-informed too, so I'm not really, I might not be putting it well, but just that deep concern that I have where touching occurs when it doesn't need to and things go south. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The floor is open for commissioners to ask Tammy any questions while we still have her.
I just wanted to say thank you, Tammy. That was a really nice presentation. I think there was a lot to be learned. I'm kind of familiar with the work you guys do as well. And I've seen a lot of stuff on the streets that never used to be here before as well. And I try to scratch my head and figure out why are things changing the way they are. But I do know one thing is that the drug problem we have is it's overwhelming to this community. And I think we really need to work harder to do something to help curb, the drugs that are coming into town. So with that being said, what are you seeing on the streets as far as like with the drug issues?
I mean, right now, the real problem drug is methamphetamine, and methamphetamine
Right.
with fentanyl. It's really interesting. When I first started this work almost 20 years ago, it was all about people who were intoxicated on the street with alcohol.
Right.
And that's such a different dynamic. And just within the last, well, I mean, the methamphetamine started, I would say, within the last 6 months, really hardcore in Burlington. And it really just changes the dynamic of everything. You know, how clients interact with clients, how providers interact with clients, how merchants interact. I mean, just how everybody, it fuels, adds gasoline to the fire of this already like paranoid, wary, fearful climate that we already kind of had going on a year ago, and then add that to it, and it's just,
Yeah.
you know, because
know,
now
and-
everybody assumes that everybody has a gun, everybody assumes that everyone has a knife, and so now everyone acts like everyone has a knife and a gun. So they're quicker to attack each other, quicker to threaten to attack you.
Yeah. My experience is that a lot of folks on the streets do have weapons, knives especially.
And I don't blame them, I would too.
Yeah. Right. But you're right. The drugs are fueling the people getting jumped, stealing from stores, just about everything. The mental health crisis. It's really behind every one of those issues.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Tammy, if you were the king of the world or the queen of the world, and you had 3 wishes that you could make 3 interventions, what would they be?
Oh, if I could have 3 things. I would have access to long-term, and by long-term I mean 28 days at least, substance use treatment. I would have, can I have 4 things? Okay. I would have more housing, and it would be easier to get. Or even just, if we could have hotel rooms again, that would be great. Something, more shelter of some kind. I would have more police officers, absolutely. I think not being able to have officers I see what not being able to do proactive work has done to me and my ability to do my job, and I feel it's the same for the police officers. And I think that the lack of them being able to get to know people, to mingle, to fraternize with folks, has only increased the paranoia and the fear. I mean, that's how our relationship with the police began in the first place, was Matt and I, Matt, the originator of Street Outreach, he and I were always downtown. We'd be standing by a stanchion on Church and Cherry, and 2 officers would be on patrol. They'd be standing at the other stanchion at Church and Cherry. They'd see us talk to somebody, and then that person would go over and talk to them, or that person would go over, would talk to them, and then they'd come over and talk to us. The officer would say, I know you can't really tell me anything about that person, but I want you to know I'm worried about them, and I'm worried about them because of X, Y, and Z. So that person may have never opened up to us about it because they would be worried about telling the mental health worker, that kind of thing. But they would tell the officer that. And so that was part of how we formed that relationship. So not having that out there, I mean, forget the safety piece, but not being able to have them out there to be able to do that just kind of cuts our efficiency to the bone. Then you get into the efficiency, the safety part of it. I mean, so then what? I mean, then there's going to be no response, right? So if I get a call, if we get a call, and there are all of these safety concerns, and it is not safe, and I can't go, but there's not an officer available because they're doing X, Y, or Z, then no one is going to go. And the same thing happens, I mean, is already happening, has been happening for a while, but the last year especially, with mental health warrants. A person has been designated or been found by a judge and a mental health clinician to be a person who is at imminent risk of harm to themselves or others, and warrants being brought to the hospital for evaluation and treatment for their safety. Great, you got the warrant, but there's no one to serve it. There were days this summer when officers tried 3 times. We would see the person, we would call the officer would try to come out to serve the warrant, but then a priority 1 thing, like somebody was actively being hit or threatened or a bad car accident or something like that, and they would have to rush off. Meanwhile, this person is still very, very ill and very much in need of treatment and very much at risk to themselves or the public. So anyway, I kind of went off on a tangent about that. So that's why I need more officers. If I could have my magic wand, we need that. And then I said housing. I said, mental health beds. Jeez, yeah. I would have more mental health beds on both ends. On the residential, kind of the housing piece for people who are hard to house, right? Like low barrier mental health housing. We don't really have that. That would be expensive and difficult to create, but it's needed. And then on the other end, I mean, what are there, 56 beds in the state of Vermont? In the state of Vermont, really? There are only 56 people who are at the point that they need to be involuntarily hospitalized? Clearly 56 isn't the right answer. I mean, I know when we deinstitutionalized in the 80s, 2,000 was too many, but 56 is like, you are leaving a whole bunch of people unserved with that number. And it's not just that, we can't lock them up, we can't punish them or whatever. These are people who are unsafe.
Right.
It is not humane. I mean, as a society to say, we are allowing them the dignity of their rights, I think that's kind of a cop-out. Because there's really nothing dignified by how these folks are living.
And then maybe another 100 or so in ERs around the state as well. Yeah.
Right. So those are my 4.
Thank you. It was really, really wonderful to hear what you had to say tonight. I think it was very helpful and educational, and thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me. And Commissioner Grant, I'd be happy to talk to you sometime.
Right, moving on to agenda item 5.03, the use of force reports for all of September and October up through, I believe up through as of Monday. So I hope everyone had a chance to review the use of force report. If there was any incidents that stood out and you'd like to review, please let DC Lebrecht know now, or if it pops up to you later on, please email him.
So, are there any videos that anyone wants to request for any of these incidents? No.
All right, that closes that agenda item. Moving on to agenda item 5.04, setting next meeting's agenda item. And the next the next monthly meeting of the Police Commission will meet, looks like it's the 22nd. I know in years past, it's always a tricky week because it's the week of Thanksgiving. right now it's scheduled for the 22nd, which is the Tuesday before Thanksgiving. I guess I don't want to put anything on the paper, put anything in the pen now, but let's talk in the next couple of days and see if we should either do it the week before, the week after, or on the 22nd.
Great. Does anybody have any items for the upcoming agenda at this point?
I do. I'd like to do a public engagement update. I've been making the rounds. I would love DC Lebrecht to talk about the presentation, the panel that he went to about oversight. And I would love to hear a summary about the panel on historical injustices in policing.
I would like my fellow commissioners to think deeply about what other resources we want to bring in for educational things, and sort of put that on the agenda for the next time that we actually have someone. So I sent out once before, and I think I may not have gotten many responses. So I think this is a really important part of the service we provide, both to ourselves, to the police department, and to the community. So let's try to think of some other things that we would like to know about.
You know, I would actually like to invite Sarah George back again. I would be interested in getting an update now that the courts are past their COVID restrictions, how that has affected bringing forward cases and how many cases because for months and months they were limited as to what they could do and had to make certain priorities that were concerning, but they had the limitations because of the pandemic. I think for a long time, people didn't realize how long these restrictions had been in place because everything else seemed to, be opened up and moving on to the new normal. I think that would be a worthwhile discussion.
So noted.
And as always, as things pop to people's minds, just email either myself or Stephanie, and we'll put them together. Moving on to agenda item 6.01, commendations that have been received for October. I believe Mohammed said that he hadn't received any.
We didn't receive any.
All right. I have one, and that is to the Detective Bureau at PPD on the swift apprehension of the suspect in double murder that happened earlier on this month. I know a bunch of people reached out to me expressing those congratulations, so that is my commendation for the month. And moving on to agenda item 7.01, which is anticipated executive session. And, sorry, I'm going to find my legal language here. I'm citing 1 VSA 3.13A4. I move to enter executive session to discuss disciplinary matters with city employees. Seconded by Commissioner Comerford. All in favor, please raise your hand or say aye. Aye. All right. Thank you, everybody that joined us for tonight's meeting, and thank you, everybody on the internet, on Zoom. Please stay tuned to board docs for our next meeting. Because, we still have to figure out what day it's going to be on, either the 22nd, 7 days before, or 7 days afterwards. Thank you very much.
And just one last thing for the chiefs who are still on. So the commission is going to meet now, and you can join us around 8:15, and we will set up the Zoom in the executive session room so you can join us then. Thanks.